foundations, bilateral organizations, multilaterals, partner countries, private sector organizations, a number of different people. And what we've done is we've established a standard in which all of those organizations can publish their data on development cooperation in the same way. So the slide that you have up here is just showing you what is the IATI standard. And the purpose for showing you this is to let you know really the vast wealth of information that you can find there already. So there are two parts to the standard. There's the organization standard and the activity standard. The organization standard is about the publisher, information about the publisher who's putting the data out there. So they will put out their forward-looking budgets, their strategic documents, their country budgets. Then the activity standard goes into much more detail at project level, activity level, where you can see the full transaction history, subnational geographic coding on projects, sectors, classifications, forward-looking budgets, conditions, outputs, outcomes. So all of that information is already there, and in the situation for Ghana, for example, already 91% of development cooperation to Ghana is published on IATI. So the message is there is a tremendous amount of information there. I am now going to hand back to James, because he's going to talk a little bit about the context of using some of this data in the Open Ag context. Thanks very much, but again, please join for this afternoon's session in which we'll go into really a lot more detail and a lot more about how the data can be accessed, used, and useful. Thanks.
Hi, so I am James Coe. I work for Publish What You Fund, but I'm part of the initiative of Open Ag Funding alongside Reed and a few other organizations. I'm only going to take a minute or two to very briefly explain what the initiative for Open Ag is, and then later on we'll be digging into kind of how we can use it, how we can publish it and whatnot in the breakout sessions. So in terms of what we're trying to do, the overall concept of it is to improve the availability and the quality of agricultural data. That's what we want. We want to be able to see who is spending what, where, and to what effect. With that information, we're hoping that people can better coordinate and collaborate. The idea is ultimately that if different organizations involved within the kind of the creation of policy, the creation of development funding, and the actual implementation of development projects, if they can see what others are doing, they know who they can reach out to for advice. They also know to avoid duplication of different projects. To briefly explain what it is we've actually done so far in the second year of our project, this is a very quick timeline of what we've been doing. We started off right from the initial user research. This is what is it that people actually need information for. We didn't approach it from the perspective of what data, but what information, what questions do you have? From that, we used our own expertise within the IATI standard to figure out what data elements that means. So that's when we got a little bit techy and a little bit geeky. We started figuring out what specific pieces of information. Ultimately, we found that there's 4 core pieces of information that most users kind of congregate around. And the first one of those is geolocation data. So the second is results information. The third is traceability, so figuring out where exactly it's going on. And then the fourth is actually looking at the descriptions and the context, the wider context which around that project so you can understand. From there, we've moved on to actually making recommendations and beginning working with donors. So this is where we started finding the largest agricultural donors in the world and began actually engaging with their tech teams to help them improve the quality of their data. We, to that effect, have started offering technical advice. We've got one of our partners is called Open Data Services. They're based in the UK. They're sitting down with different donors, agricultural donors, and helping them improve the quality of their data. One example, in fact, our colleague is currently sat at IFAD in Italy right now, trying to improve their publication of information. The other work stream that we've been working on is tool development. So this is actually some tools. We'll be looking into the publication process. For any of you in the room who actually publish data or looking to publish information, we've been designing a whole range of tools which will improve and enhance that your ability to do so whilst reducing the burden. I won't go into that now, but catch us if you're interested and we'll explain it, or join the session in the afternoon and we'll talk about it a lot more. But the one that we'll be focusing on today is actually using the information. So we're also investing in a platform which will mean that you can see who is spending what, where, and to what effect from a global level. So you don't have to go into one donor at a time. You'll be able to see what's going on in Ghana. So that's the goal of kind of very briefly the Open Ag project. We'll be finishing our first phase at the end of this year, and yeah, so join us later. Over to Reed.
All right, so that's enough of the presentations. Now we're going to have some breakout sessions. First of all, who had heard of EODI before you walked in this room? Raise your hands. Okay, a few. Perfect. All right, hands down. For those who had not heard of EODI, but are cognizant and aware of a multitude of other development data resources, raise your hands. I'm sure more of you should be raising your hands, but okay. All right, so we're going to have 3 breakout sessions, and I'm going to invite you, when we get into these 3 tables, to push your chairs aside and stand. This is not the best room for doing a workshop, but we're going to try to make it a little more engaging by having everyone standing around a table. We're going to be writing on note cards. We're going to be moving things around. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we invite you all to contribute whatever you know, whatever your perspective is, to the questions we're asking in these tables. So, table 1 is going to be led by James, and he's going to be doing a brief demo, I think up here at the front using the projector, to show how you use EODI data, what tools are available, what resources there are to understand it and to add context to it. So if you're a bit new to EODI, or you aren't aware of everything that's out there to use and manipulate EODI data, please join James. Table 2 is going to be this question about how can this data on aid resources, where they're being spent, how can it help us to plan, target, coordinate, and learn from each other better. So we're going to be talking about all the different resources that you use, whether it's data, conversations, networks, meetings, reports, to gather information about a project or a planning cycle or a program, and mapping out what the pain points are there and how we might potentially bring some solutions to that. So if that sounds like you, please join me at table 2, which let's say it'll be on this side over here, somewhere in that general area. We'll see how many people we get. And then table 3, I think, is going to be led by my boss, Alicia Phillips Mandeville, the Vice President for Interaction. And she's going to be talking about how can we use other data sources that are out there, like national government data, local government data especially, things that would add context to EODI but aren't being fully utilized right now for this question of coordination and solving coordination challenges. Any questions before we get started? Everyone good? It's early, I know. Hope everyone's had enough coffee. Okay, so let's say table 1 with James right up here in front of the projector, table 2 over on that side of the room, and table 3 on this side of the room. And please do stand, get together, don't slink to the back, take notes, and jump in wherever you see a gap. Thanks. And one last thing, if you are thinking, ooh, I want to go to 2 tables, but I can't be in 2 places at once, we may be doing a swap halfway through. So if there's 2 things you want to hear about, we might switch halfway and let people cycle in and out of different tables. Okay, that's really it. Thanks.
Right. Because the skill sets are there, and suppose they are more of consultants. Yeah, so then you can think of intake increasing the intake and things like that. So I understand it's difficult.
And even though the data is sensitive as you said, it can be architected in such a way that can anonymize the data too. So there are techniques to even meet those kind of requirements. Yeah.
Other folks who are trying to do data analysis or writing stories, what kinds of information do you expect the local, whether that's local government, the network, or whether that's the mayor's office, or that's maybe the governor's office, what kinds of information?
Infrastructure data,
Yeah. Demographic is very important. Then planning data.
Local level, and they only give us the aggregate at the central level. So at the central level, you don't really get the whole perspective. If you get the local level data of education, health, crime, infrastructure, facilities, you can do a better job. But we don't get that. We just get the aggregated data, which is quite screwed up.
Quite, right? Quite screwed up.
They are not structured to give you the information
Exactly.
that you expect.
Right.
The information they generate is an administrative. They do you need to, but you might have further analysis of that data,
But again,
which to them it's
No,
not.
the structure is there for them to give. They can give, they have an MIS entry. But their thing is, they are anyway sending reports to the state, and then the state is giving it to the center. So why did you take the effort?
drill down analysis is what
government, it's difficult when it goes to the local level, they tell you to go through,
Yeah.
and then most of the time when it comes to government, you get some training period by the executive branch, just like Nigerian
Yeah.
space. You understand? But it is a data set that is good for the citizens to know. An example of which is the GP. I'll give you for example, at the time the contract was given, the government wasn't willing to make it open to the citizens. But they went ahead to give it to international organizations to know about it. Meanwhile, the citizens in the country are supposed to know what these organizations or companies that enter into our country do, the contact details, what is it that, and what comes, what are sort of the benefits that comes to the people. So, I know at the government level, it's things in secrecy and all that, makes things difficult for anyone to see.
If you are down or if you are working for people, you also understand that this is constraints. Because if it is open, it is not absolutely open. If you are working in the government, you have what we call general certain things that we cannot put up there. So if you go and tell me, okay, we can give you up to this level, but not beyond. You should understand. I mean, we cannot give everything. I mean, even in the US, they don't put everything up there for people to.
Specific things, though.
Yes,
I think the
but
difference is
I think some of the data set that should be hidden, in my opinion, perhaps things that are threatening national security. If it is just for planning, if it is just for planning, development purposes, for intervention, I think it should be left out.
But
For
again,
example,
there can be solutions to find a middle ground. Yet satisfy the national security issues as well as the demand of the end user.
Let's identify some actual examples. So is it somebody said looking for hospitals, like where are hospitals? Right? Is that the kind of thing that you're, the kind of data
for
set that
example,
you're
for example, if you doing data set gathering from the household at the household level, the country is divided into political regions. So if you want to collect, for example, you say northern region, in the central region, there are how many hospitals in central region? What's the population? How is population distributed? And so if you have a section of the population, access to healthcare is difficult, perhaps the hospital is far from them. What do you do? And so once you have that kind of information, perhaps government or other entities can come in, oh no, we have this place, there's a pathway, can we build a hospital here so that they can maybe 3-4 hours access the health center.
I have another question. It sounds really interesting, but to on the ground reality, do you have this data fed in by people or it is coming through an application? Why I'm asking you this, to feed data, like in India, how it is done. People just put the data, like we have 5 hospitals in this particular district, that is the lowest level in this particular district, and it caters to 600 patients every day, each hospital. I'm hypothetical, but there is no, it is not that from the blood bank directly the data is shared.
policy behavior dictates what goes where. For example,
I also want to know people who misuse the data, because I have a conversation like I understand the business, but I have leaders who are like, let's say, credit score, let's say age, what are the other issues? Network usage,
manganese and all other things will cause disease. Yeah. So if we want to introduce bauxite, manganese, bauxite, manganese, gold, and diamond are together. So, okay, so you don't find this. You have to check with the Ministry of Finance. Okay, go, okay. We have all the conventional Maybe you can Google and get something that happened in maybe 100 years ago. But I mean, you come to Africa, it's extremely difficult. You see, we are now trying to digitize so many things now. So if you want to get something 50 years ago, probably you can get it on paper, but not soft copy.
The problem,
what is being done
Oh, no, national archives. National archives.
to make sure that we have
Exactly, digitize this thing.
so like we're being extracting information data and making sure that what are we doing, what are the strategies or initiatives we're taking to make sure that we take this data that is actually from people 50 years ago, some of it is there, and put it in the system. So what have you done?
Oh boy. Oh boy.
As you want to I mean, you should also.
I can tell you what has been done in India so that he will partly answer for him. Like problem that we face is that lots of data is collected by the government, which is anyway coming slow, steadily, but it is coming. And there are a whole lot of data which private sector, who are all engaged private sector,
how much money they spend running it because it's all about
and
and
researchers
it's
also
actually
don't
very
want
hard
it.
to get anybody from source.
Yeah, that's why you have to. And then the researchers want to publish. Even if their work is published, still they don't want to publish it.
That's
Even
good.
if the
Everyone is
paper
sitting
is
on its
published.
gold. Yeah.
You see, apart from prioritization, there's as with the there is one also medical students and what they got decision see, so if you are coming for this data and from his or her own capacity, things like that, even the political aspect, you will need it. Yeah, so that thing is there. But they, yeah, but they will not tell you that, oh, you should find a way of, oh, go and come. Yeah, that's what they did. So he will frustrate you to the extent that you wouldn't go and come. Because maybe to him, it is not prosperous.
But the challenge is that when you concoct a data set of go around to get some information and do, immediately you put it out there, you come back.
Because they have the right. You see, they have the right data, but they really want to give it. So don't go and bring the false
Our problem is another catch-22. If he is a statistician in the department, we make the chief data officer in each department who is responsible for giving the data. If he is a statistician, he understands and he wants to bring the data. But the data is not only of his department, of his division. It belongs to his division, her division. He doesn't have any control in the data. If I make an administrator as the chief data officer, the administrator has got some control to release the data, but he doesn't appreciate why should it be given.
That is why we take expertise. You see, and then you see, that is really you know, each department or each ministry has own interest. So, like, if you don't go to the right place, for instance, you go to education and you are asking of how many beds do you have in the district. The beds in hospitals is not of any interest to education ministry. Yeah, but the number of children in both schools and the state of the schools and other things, they will correct data in respect of those things. But
There are some subjects then where we can tell where to go. So if you want to know children's schools, you
yeah, there's also sometimes so
you don't go to agriculture or you don't go
sometimes you go to the wrong entity for data, and if they are not able to provide, you want to add the data.
But there must be a central point.
Here's the question. What are the kinds of information where it's hard to figure out? Because for economic information, you go into straightforward, or maybe then they tell you actually it's statistics, right? But for education, what kinds of information is very massive? Because then there's a conversation we had about is the solution a single point? Is the solution that the government itself has a better they were being proactive on that, but they also have their limitations in terms of if your data set somehow spotlights their incompetency or lack of attention on this major problem in the country, then it doesn't get published. So it is somehow unraveling, I think, that there's that.
Some of the data is structured by the like now government has set up what we call Ghana National Master Plan. It is now trying to collate vulnerable groups, their information jointly allocated. So they are now putting it. So like if they finish and you go to that you asking for maybe data on vulnerable groups, domestic violence, they are able to get. But you see, hitherto, I mean, that thing is not centralized as now we are trying. So you should also appreciate the fact we are now building some of these structures.
For example, with migration data, we have it in many stakeholders. So now what we are trying to do is to put them together by signing a data sharing agreement with all the stakeholders. Then create a common platform where the data, all the data will be aggregated. Then any whoever wants to go, do a package and then so that's what we are
I
trying
have
to
this
do.
question that I asked them.
No, it's not a difficult question.
It's rolling here. So I asked this, I think you were there. So as we encourage data development from the stakeholders, where do we draw the line between privacy, innovation, and
And ethics.
So we're saying we're giving this data out because we want them to innovate and bring about development and everyone gets into thinking. But at the same time, we're saying, you would say, something needs to happen because of whatever reason. And then you go back to, we need you to be accountable. So if you don't give us that data, how are we going to?
But again, this is not an unusual challenge. You find this anywhere. But again, the key is to find a solution that is going to be acceptable to different parties, different stakeholders, right? To find a technical solution, policy, process solutions, a combination of all of that. In a sense, all of that. But overriding all of this is really the default is to share data, to treat data as an organizational asset, right? Especially public data. It is owned by the public. It is no one's. It's not owned by one department or whatever. I think that will require a cultural shift in mentality. We can view data
interesting to report.
There are many interesting things, but I think the conclusion was that sometimes what you expect to see data collect at a local level, you actually have to go and find it in some location. So for us, the expectation about where you get the information, the reality is where it might be.
Okay.
I like that.
So data about a specific location might actually exist elsewhere. It's not possessed by who you would logically think it is. Interesting. So I can report for the group over here, since we're short on time. We laid out a bunch of types of information that we need to get our hands on. We laid out the challenges with each of those pieces of information, and we came up with 3 words to solve all of our problems: digitize, standardize, and incentivize. Now we just need to figure out what that means and how to implement it. James, your group? Yeah, go ahead.
From our group, we had quite some interesting discussions around the availability of the data, but how that then translates to our local contexts. And that was the challenge that we sort of grappled around, but also spoke about the need for some additional specificity to be able to distinguish, for example, whether if the data was used, say, for agriculture, did it go to farmers or did it go to ministers on a benchmarking job?
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. We are ending exactly on time. Thank you. We deeply appreciate your participation. Have a good day. Oh, 3 o'clock today to hear more about the International Aid Transparency Initiative if you're interested. What room? Meeting room 1. 3 o'clock, meeting room 1. Thank you.
In digital rights, as well as Francophone West Africa more generally. And then there's me, Fadzai, and my focus is internet disruptions research, content policy work, as well as now privacy. So that's just to give you an idea of the public policy team that works across the region. And when I say across the region, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. This is something I usually have to do when I'm outside of Africa. But our team covers 48 countries. So that is more than 2,000 languages across 48 different regulatory systems, governments. I don't even want to get into ethnicities, cultures, and tribes that we work with as well. So we find ourselves pretty much on planes between countries, working as much as we can within reason. So it's super exciting that I have the opportunity to be here in Ghana for this for the Open Data Conference. That is overall what we do and what we cover. In terms of this specifically, I think you would have followed recent announcements around our Data for Good initiatives, as well as our crisis map, which Chaya has been leading on and that she will talk us through, as well as through the workshop. No luck? Okay. Oh well. As well as through this workshop. But the work we do covers everything from connectivity to government outreach, to civil society outreach, to working on our community standards to ensure that we learn as much as we can, to privacy, to VR. The list goes on and is also in my slides. So, I am really excited to have Chaya here, who it's not just her first time in Ghana, but her first time in region, which is super exciting. So I'm very eager to get her to have Jollof later on. I'm Zimbabwean, so I don't have to pick a side. I like all Jollof. I think if anyone has any questions for me, please come to me if you'd like my email address after the session. I did have it on the slide for everyone to write down, but my name is Zimbabwean and long, so it's a little bit complicated. So please come to me after the session if you'd like my email address. I would love to hear about some of the work that you guys are doing, especially around privacy and data, now that we're engaging more extensively in the region. Also to hear from you guys what we should be doing, what we should be thinking. A lot of our engagements are very much learning and trying to understand better what the market is thinking and what our users are thinking. So please feel free to let me know your thoughts and ideas. Questions? It was a little bit all over the place. I promise I practiced it with slides before. No? Okay. So get into it with, oh. She also had really pretty slides, so I feel very sad that you're not going to see them. Yes, perfect. Right, okay. Sorry, I sort of breezed over that. So, a lot of the work, let's start from the beginning. Internet disruptions, i.e. Shutdowns, blockings, throttlings, etc., whether government sponsored or not, something that I research into specifically because in the last 2 years, we've seen the number of shutdowns globally increase threefold, and the majority of those are happening within sub-Saharan Africa. So the work that I do is focused on trying to understand why that's happening. Why have we seen an increase? What are the patterns around that? Trying to do better detection, but also leading on the research around the economic and social impact of a disruption. Ghana is one of my favorite case studies for when it comes to being able to run an election without shutting down the internet, which is a great thing that I've been able to take into a lot of my other discussions across region. I think the way the Ghanaian elections worked were, I think it's a testament to being able to use social media to reach constituents. So you had the Ghana Police Service tweeting, asking people to report if they saw anything out of order. You had the election board using their Facebook and Twitter page to announce results and letting everyone know that if you see results elsewhere, those are not true. You had peace-building organizations using Twitter, WhatsApp, and Facebook to send out peace messages, encouraging Ghanaians to vote peacefully. And you also had political parties using the platforms to engage with their constituents, so all of that combined meant that it's far more detrimental to not have social media going than it is to shut it down, which I think in a lot of other markets, there's always a bit of a concern about having it running. So I mean, the next big election is Kenya, which I think we're all super focused on and trying to see what that's going to look like. But Ghana is definitely one of my favorite examples to talk about across the region as to how you run a social media during an election period. So that's my work, yeah. So that's one of, sorry, I breezed over that very quickly. That is one of my focus areas that I look into specifically. No other questions? Okay. So I'm going to pass on to Shaya so that way we don't, because I know that we're running little on time. But thank you.
Okay, so while they're still trying to figure out the PowerPoint, I'll just start talking to you guys a little bit about our Data for Good program at Facebook. And just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a public policy research manager at Facebook, and I lead Facebook's Data for Good program. Now, what do we mean when we talk about Data for Good, and what does it mean to us as a company? Now, I want to be honest that Data for Good is actually a very, very new thing at Facebook. We've only had a team for around 1.5 to 2 years. And I think the reason that we're such a new initiative is that at first Facebook was a little bit scared to think about how we could share data about our users with the world. And I saw a lot of hands in this room go up when we asked who had a Facebook account. Now, one question I have for the people in this room is, in terms of the way that your data is being used, or the kind of things that you think about when you start a Facebook account, oh, look at that, it's our lucky day. let me try to get this up, and then I'll come back.
I think about how to entertain you. Um, okay, wait. How many people said they had a Facebook account? Instagram? WhatsApp? Like, okay. So some of the work I also do is around our community standards. So I saw a lot of hands go up for that they had an account. How many people report content that they see on the platform? You see, that surprises me because every single person should be reporting content all the time that is on the platform because there's a lot of violating content on the platform. So some of the work that I do is also around trying to investigate and encourage user reporting. So sub-Saharan Africa as a region is underreporting. And so what I mean is that if you were to combine Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, all of those, the reports we get from those countries are less than we get from Turkey. So a lot of the work I do is trying to understand why is that? Why is it that people don't report? Why don't people report the content that they see once we get into sub-Saharan Africa? Because what that means is that the average Ghanaian has a very different experience of our platform as compared to the average German. Part of that is because people actually don't know what our community standards are. So they don't know that if you see nudity on the platform, is it working? If you see nudity on the platform, you should report it. So reporting is the little 3 dots that are in the corner of a post. If you click that, underneath it asks you, do you want to report this post? And then you follow those steps. And that is a 24/7, so hate speech, nudity, report. So Chaya is going to walk you through how to think about approaching policy challenges from a data-driven perspective. The idea is that by the time you leave at the end of the day, you've been given the tools to consider how to engage with data, especially in order to find policy solutions. Yes? Okay.
Okay, well, while they pull the file up, I'll go back to the question that I had for you guys. So when you guys thought about kind of getting onto Facebook, how many of you guys just had a consideration or thought about the data that you're giving to Facebook as a company? And just get a show of hands, how many people have thought about the data that Facebook gets from your use of Facebook? So a few people. It's definitely that's something on people's minds, and I think as a company, one thing that surprised me when I joined was that there's a lot of, I would say, consideration of the trust that people put in us as a company in terms of storing the data that you have when you use Facebook. And just so you guys are aware, I actually sit at the privacy team at Facebook. Sorry, I was leaning over. Okay. So just so you guys are aware, I sit on the privacy team at Facebook. And so the reason that our Data for Good program is situated under the privacy team is because in order for us to feel comfortable sharing data, even if it's data that's being shared for good, we wanted to make sure that there were really strong privacy practices that were put as the foundation of the data sets that are being shared. Perfect. Great. So it looks like the presentation's just about up, and I'll kind of go through that, and then I'll leave room at the end for questions. And then what the plan is for today after lunch is to come back, and we're actually working on workshopping how to actually think about a data for good research problem and how to use data to solve that problem. And so I'm excited to be able to invite you guys back here to do that workshop with us. So just to start, again, I already said I'm Chaya, and I'm part of our Data for Good team at Facebook. And the structure of this presentation is really just sharing a couple of examples of how Facebook is working on Data for Good. And one of the things that I will say is that this is really one of the first times that, well, this is the first time that I'm in Ghana as well as in Africa, as Faz has said. But it's also, to us, really the start of building a foundation for how we can do Data for Good for Africa and the region as a whole. And so a lot of the examples that you'll see are our first projects that happened over the past year. And what we're doing, working with the in-region teams, is really figuring out how we can work to support the amazing work that organizations on the ground here in country are doing, and really start to partner with them to do more work in the future. So the first example I'd like to show you is an example of the work that we've done around Zika in Brazil. Now, how many people know that people use Facebook in order to kind of get people to buy products through ads? A lot of people, right? That's kind of how you know Facebook. That's how we pay to be able to provide a platform that connects people. When our Data for Good program started, one of the questions that we had was, how can we actually take a platform that's built to help organizations kind of bring ads to people so that they can advertise their products and actually use it to do good in the world? And when Zika started in Brazil, one of the questions we asked ourselves was, okay, well, we know that people need two things when a pandemic breaks out. One is they critically need information, so they need to understand, one, what's happening, and two, how they might be able to support their community in dealing with the problem. And so what we were able to do was build a program where we actually created an ad content with UNICEF based out of Brazil. And so the UN Children's Education Foundation, we actually worked with them to create content that talked about the community around Zika. So one of the first things that we did was we actually looked and saw who was talking about Zika on Facebook. We actually looked at this demographically, so understanding was it men or women who were talking about Zika the most? What age brackets were they? Where were they like predominantly located in terms of regions? And based on that information, we initially had the hypothesis that Zika, it's primarily a disease that impacts women when they're of childbearing age. And what we found was surprising was that actually men were more likely to be talking about Zika on Facebook, and that was actually controlling for the fact that there were more men on Facebook in Brazil. And so what we did was we actually targeted a message to men in the Brazilian community, and the message actually talked about, and go ahead and switch the slide. The message actually talked about how people could actually use their community to educate people on Zika and to start combat mosquito spread illnesses around their community by doing things like picking up after water cans that were left out in like the cities, and actually doing community building campaigns to educate people about the disease. And so what we found out was that if we actually targeted this ad and helped UNICEF do the targeting, we actually went from only 60,000 people reached with the UNICEF ad originally to, in the first few hours of the targeted ad being placed out, we actually reached over 4 million people. And so if you're an organization that is seeking to educate a lot of people in kind of one fell swoop, this is one way that you can actually reach a population very quickly. And go ahead. And another thing that our advertisers have that survey to see if you actually recognize those genes more because of the ad. We can do the same thing with our work around Zika, where we were actually able to take this community awareness campaign, and then after the fact, we actually asked people, are you actually more likely to do something in your community to combat Zika? And what we found was that 82% of people said yes, and this was actually a 3% increase from the control group of people who had not been served the ad. And so for statisticians in the room, and I know everyone here is a data person, a 3% increase is quite large, and if you think about it in terms of the Brazilian population, could actually amount to millions of people. go ahead and switch. So in terms of the next step, and I kind of opened this conversation saying that we're actually starting very soon, I'm kind of teasing this a little bit. We're actually announcing a partnership with the Nigerian CDC to do a project around, a similar project around meningitis. To help them get messaging out to the community about actually needing to take their kids or their family to the doctor if they see signs of meningitis, or ways that they can actually combat meningitis around the house. And so this is something that we're hoping to launch in the next few weeks, and then we'd actually have an announcement that we've done it, as well as some of the lift studies that are associated with it. But we're super excited to be able to partner with the Nigerian CDC on this project and hope that this is the start to more partnerships in region. So the second project I'd love to talk about is a little bit of a shift from our initial kind of conversation around ads. So this is actually a project that we work with in partnership with the World Bank and the OECD. And it's our Future of Business survey. And so for anyone who follows the economy, for instance, one thing that you guys know is that it's really hard to get good information on businesses. This is for a wide variety of reasons. One, business surveys, and surveying in general is very, very expensive. To get people boots on ground, trying to talk to the right people, even if you're just calling, it's really hard to know that you're actually talking to the person who owns the business or is in a place of leadership. And so as we started to examine another thing that we could do as a company in order to support data for good, what we thought was that we could do this partnership with the OECD and the World Bank to understand how we can survey businesses on Facebook to understand their perception and their optimism about the digital economy. Go ahead and switch. So the Future of Business survey is structured as a questionnaire. Every month, we survey 42 countries, including in the Africa region, South Africa, Egypt, and Nigeria. And we're actually working to expand this survey. The only kind of hurdle that we have right now is sample size. So, for instance, if we wanted to expand to Ghana, Ghana is really close, but we don't quite have enough businesses on Facebook in Ghana yet to be able to get going to the next piece, what we see here is we survey businesses on a bunch of different things. One, we ask about their optimism about the economy, on the economy of their country as well as the economy for their industry. And two, how optimistic are they about the future? The third piece is actually thinking about what industries businesses are in. So we actually ask trade-specific questions, questions about whether or not digital flows and trading across borders helps to make a business more optimistic. We've asked questions on digital payments. So for instance, does launching of digital payments, such as payments on your phone, allow businesses to succeed more and get more customers? And what we're hoping to do in the future, and Fadzai mentioned that we have a colleague, Sherry, who actually works for this region on SME work, is actually partner with a local organization to start thinking about what specific questions we can add to localize this for the region. And so that's kind of a goal for the future for us. So the next one is going to show a video. What this video shows is some of the work that we're doing on population density mapping. And this is pretty phenomenal. What you're seeing right now is the previous state of the art of population density data. So you can see it's not very granular, the resolution's pretty low. As we zoom in, what you can see now is population density data using Facebook artificial intelligence. So what are we doing to get this type of population density data? What we're doing is we're actually sourcing data from satellite imagery, And we're using some of the very same algorithms that are used to power Facebook in order to recognize patterns of buildings in the satellite imagery. Once we have those patterns, what we're able to do is actually identify population densities and buildings and settlements. And then we're able to take that settlement data and basically predict the number of people that live in that area based on the size of the settlement, how dense it is, where we're seeing it, kind of the neighbors around it. And what that leads us to is we actually end up with population density maps at 30-meter resolution, which is pretty phenomenal. And so one of our partners, so we actually do produce these maps open source. And one of the fortunate things is the African regions that we have the most maps for, which I think is really exciting. So what I'm showing here is actually some footage that our partners at the Red Cross gave us during a vaccination campaign against measles and rubella in Malawi. And what they did was, if you go ahead and switch the slide, they were actually able to use the population density maps to go from having to cover 100% of the territory across the country of Malawi to actually cutting out 97% of landmass and only having to focus on 3% of the region because they actually knew where people resided. And this was a vaccination campaign where they sought to vaccinate 95% of the country, and so it was quite the large project that they were doing. And basically what they did is they paired a bunch of map data together, such as our population density maps, in order to, and go ahead and switch it, in order to actually identify where people were living and then be able to target measles and rubella shots to those regions. Go ahead and flip. So this is just a sense of kind of how granular the data set is for Malawi. And go ahead and switch again. And really what our partners told us was that having this type of population density data helped them make better decisions on where to put people on the ground to actually administer these shots. And in terms of how this can be used by other organizations, is anyone here from a national statistics organization at all? Maybe again. No. Well, for instance, a national statistics organization could use this data to understand how many people they need to survey in different locations to make sure that their statistics are actually accurate. Health organizations can use it to figure out where to place health facilities, transportation networks to figure out how many roads need to be built for a particular area. The uses are really endless. We can move to the next one. Okay, so this project is actually the project that's most dear to my heart. So this is our disaster maps project, which we announced ago. And the reason that this project is really exciting and important to me is because it's the first time that Facebook is actually sharing aggregated, anonymized data with organizations in order to solve really hard policy challenges. And so what we're doing here is we're actually partnering with the Red Cross, UNICEF, and the World Food Program to start. But we're hoping to actually work with the different regional teams to find organizations in region as well. And we're sharing data on where people are located during a natural disaster, how they're moving, and where they're checking in safe via Facebook's Safety Check application. In order to help organizations figure out during a hurricane, an earthquake, a flood, maybe even a drought in the future, where people are located so that they can get them the resources that they need the most during a disaster. Now, one of the things that we think about every day at Facebook is we know that only certain parts of the population are in our data sets. And so things that we're working on that I'd love people in this room to think about as we go into the workshop phase after lunch is how do we deal with things like making sure that we have representativity across regions, especially when there's only certain portions of the population who actually have connectivity to mobile devices. How do we use data to actually figure out where to get resources, and how do we actually make sure that the data is being used in a way that can actually make a difference? And then third, the question that we're asking is, how do we get it to the right organizations at the right time so that they can actually make an impact? And so with that, I'd like to take a break now. What we'll do is when you guys come back, you all have the workbooks in front of you. The goal of the workshop will be to take problems that your organizations are thinking about that require data-driven solutions and actually workshop through them as a group to figure out what's next. How do we actually use data to solve these challenges? Where do we get the data from? How do we structure a problem to make it usable? And kind of go from there. And so I'd love to invite you all to come back and work with us, and Faz and I will kind of walk around the room and have open conversations, and then we'll invite people to come up and talk about the problems that they have. The final thing that I want to close on is really the goal of this workshop is for us to get ideas on how we can start working in this region. And so we're super eager to learn from everyone here, kind of thinking about the ways that Facebook could use its own data, how your teams can use data to solve policy problems. And we're actually going to write a little bit of a workbook at the end of this that we'll share back with all the conference participants. And so we'd love to kind of use this as more of a brainstorming activity. So with that, I'd love to invite you guys back after lunch, and feel free to ask any questions if you have any as well.
Use the media as our platforms to advocate.
Do you guys use Facebook?
Yes, please. We do have a Facebook page. Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we can start out, and maybe we can do the same format because I think it works well. So the first part about this is, I'm just curious how much data you guys use in your day-to-day.
We have done in terms of data research, and then it has been helpful in our organization to actually push us forward and make people actually recommend us for jobs. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so I think now that I have a, oh, do you want to? Oh, what the question was. So did you introduce yourself? You did. Okay. So the question I had was, what is like the way that your organization uses data right now?
Usually year after year, there are days where we celebrate. Let's say we observe, let's say, a day for the girl child, something like they are domestic abuse, days like that. So usually we compare the data of, let's say, the previous year and the current one, and we see how let's say, the targets we've been able to meet. And if, let's say, we are doing what we have to do, or we are kind of, when we check, let's say, the previous one and the current one, we see that it's a little bit bigger than what we expected. And we see that we are biting more than we can chew. We can break it into sessions and then, like, go from one target to the next. So I think my organization uses data a lot. And we usually go to, I think, UNICEF's website, because we usually deal with human rights and stuff like that. So we are usually with organizations like that. And so I think, for me personally, that is where, before I say something on there, it has to be right. So I usually get information on their websites before I say something on radio, because when you are accountable for stuff you say on there, and you don't always have to be right. So I think there are sources that I trust when I try to speak on issues. Yes.
Okay, so I think this workbook, the idea is that if you're trying to use data What I think would be helpful for us to do, especially for me as I'm trying to learn from the ways that your organization has used data, is not go through this workbook like line by line, but rather talk through kind of the general concepts just so we can get a sense of how we kind of work through these problems. So just to introduce like how Facebook uses data, and I kind of gave the presentation before lunch on this. I would say from Facebook's perspective and the data for good perspective, we use data in a lot of ways. I think one thing that we presented was using Facebook as a platform to figure out who is talking or thinking about a specific subject, and then being able to target us just like you were saying, Facebook, as well as you when you're looking for products. The second way is actually figuring out in aggregate, so an individual person's data set. So you walking down the street using your Facebook application, that data isn't really that helpful, right? Because one single data point, it doesn't do very much for us. One thing that I do in my job a lot is figure out how do we take millions of people's worth of data, aggregate it in some meaningful way without losing some kind of signal, and then actually use that to do something that's good for development or good for humanity. So those are the ways that I use data. I think the next question I have maybe for us to talk through as a group is in terms of like the ways that you approach using data, how do you kind of like think about the reason that you need this data? Do you guys like form a hypothesis that you need to solve, or is it more so that you're kind of already doing something and you have a question and so you find the data and answer that question? Like, how do you almost like approach your research problem with like the need for using data sets? Does that make sense?
Maybe I can try and understand the question. The main reason we use data in our organization is maybe there are two things that I can think of. One is to tell a story of, for example, we produce a product. We want to tell a story of the impact of that product to the small scale farmers. We can't just say, oh, this product is working. We have to have the data. We have to have the proof that this product is actually improving the livelihood of the farmer, of the small scale farmer, in producing what they are trying to produce. That's one aspect. The other aspect is telling a story to our donors, the people, the organizations that are providing us with the funds to do all this kind of research, develop these technologies. We also need to demonstrate to them that they are having their money's worth. And how can we do that? Using data. Yeah.
That's helpful. And just a follow-up question, do you guys use data when you're like building, like researching what technology to build in the first place? Because it seems like, I think like one thing that I realized, at least I have a policy background, a lot of policies, they only measure the effect of the policy afterwards, but they don't use data to figure out what that policy should be. I'm curious if that's ever come up in your organization.
Yeah, I think it does. For example, most of the products that we produce most regulators in the country that we're trying to develop these projects don't really see the value. So you can only try to have them change the policy so that they can use these kind of products through providing the information that is done through it. Yeah, yeah.
I think with regards to what you said on policy, I think we are not quite there yet when it comes to ensuring that our policies actually is what drives the use of the data. In the sense that I recently took part in a data collection for a company here in Ghana, on behalf of clients as an international agency. And by and large, when I cross-reference that with similar projects that I've done with other agencies, it always seems to be the case where it's after they have collected the data that it starts thinking of policies to support the data. And what it means is they already number of institutions that actually treat this as a program or maybe a short course of some form. It would help people better understand the use of data and how to generate proper data, because not all data out there is actually verifiable and reputable for you to use. Exactly. A lot of them are garbage. Yes. And so if we have these in place to teach people who are interested in it and how to go about it, it would help so that in the future when there are projects that regards data, they can have people who would say, no, this project is supposed to be data driven. Exactly.
But I think even in the US, it's like a Silicon Valley branding thing, where statisticians, like really what a data scientist is a statistician, but it's like you brand yourself as a data scientist, and so there's a marketing aspect to it too. It's like data, it's statistics plus like engineering programming capabilities.
Yeah, so I think what you asked was how we go around, and the basic thing that happens is that we always have problems first. At least for my organization, we have problems first. So probably clients will come to us that they need maybe a content writer for a copyright document for whatever they do, because and follow from there they decide to do more with the information. So a copyright would require that they have certain keywords in their documents that would throw light on whatever they're doing. And then from that document they will decide to go maybe marketing, or digital marketing, so social media or something, or go and since they probably get a website or something, they always take that data that we provide them, and then they decide to go in his direction policies or get solutions to what they have. And that's what I've noticed. So it's always a problem that comes first. We always have an idea. If it's a business for you, we have an idea, and then from the idea you try to develop, expand the idea by brainstorming, researching, collection of data. Then from there you decide to find policies and solutions to that challenges like what the data that you collected. And it has always been like that for us. So whoever our clients is, they come and then they just give you, I want this, and they're done. And then you have to do all the other work, and they give them what they want. They review and then they get back to you. So it has always been like that, and back and forth until you get a working policy or a working solution that will work for them, for their particular needs. And so I would say that we go through idea of problems, then we brainstorm to collect data, and then we analyze that data, and then we get solutions. That would be the approach that we normally do.
And I'm curious, just connecting what you both had said, do you feel like there's times when like a customer comes with like too narrow of an idea, like they almost want you to find a solution, and how do you address that problem? How can you take something that you do in your business to kind of expand their problem to something wider, and how can you maybe move that to the social sector or government?
Okay, so normally sometimes when the client comes, they really know, like they have the idea, but they don't really know what they wanted. So the best way to understand a client is to normally talk to them. So we sit down with them to just provide a professional viewpoint. Tell them, okay, this is what you want, is there exactly this or that, or in your own way, can you just tell me, okay, if you are selling the product to me, how would you sell this product, the idea that you have to me? Then from the conversation we get to pick up, okay, this is actually what the client wants, or this is what they want, or this is what. For instance, the client can come and say, okay, I want a logo. And you say, okay, what business do you do? I am into maybe textiles. And you get the client a logo and say, no, I don't want this kind of logo. I want this kind. Then the client will come with samples of the logo. So originally when the client was coming to you, he or she had an idea, and the way he or she wants the logo, right? So if you spoke to the client earlier, you wouldn't have to go back to drawing boards with them. So you just talk to the client, and you get to get more information. They don't know the specific terminology to use or to explain what they want, because they are not professionals.
disparate from one another. And so we mentioned that as a complaint to try and talk to them to resolve that before we continued. But it seemed they were just too stubborn to accept what we were proposing. So what we did was go out there, gather the data, and then repush to them. And then when it's time for analysis, they clean, they analyze the process and whatever. But at some point in time, they kept on changing the requirements when they discovered what we were getting on ground. And it became too much of a hassle. I almost didn't go out for data collection one day. I was so annoyed. But then I decided, well, if I decide not to go, they will decide to extend the duration for data collection, and I would just eat into my time and eat into other projects I had to do. So I continued. And one way we were able to resolve that was, since they were unwilling to cooperate with what we were proposing, we got what they wanted, and then we did a bit of analysis on our end to serve as an alternative to theirs. So we sort of had like two different solutions. Theirs was strictly what they wanted within their limits, and then ours was more of an extended version. And in the end, we went through a lot of back and forth before they eventually accepted what we gave them as an alternative. You see, so I think sometimes it's okay to work like that, but when you work like that, it's not so appropriate, because then again, they would want you to prove that what you have gotten for them as an alternative is correct. So, exactly, you have to negotiate for that as well, and it's too much trouble.
I'm curious, from the impact analysis side, do you ever see you doing that with donors? Like, when you basically do donors ever kind of have a preconceived notion of what they want you to build with the money that they give, and then you have to prove to them why what you're already building is something that's more powerful or stronger on the ground?
Well, mainly the problem that we have with our donors, when you're working in our field of technology development, the research period usually takes a very long time. You can be working on a maize hybrid or a maize technology advanced gene for a maize, and that period may take up to 5 to 6 years. And donors give you, they may want you to demonstrate impact, and you haven't even deployed the product. That's the only challenge that you have in our field. But generally, we don't have changing goals on our the requirements.
Yeah, and to add to that, what we have done over time is that as we go back and forth, we actually get to create a form. Like, as we talk to the clients, we get to create a form. So if you come and you want something, depending on how simplistic or vague your idea is, we give you the questionnaire to fill. And hopefully by the time you sit down with your colleagues to fill that questionnaire and you come back to us, we have something concrete to work with. So we collected data from what he said, just the back and forth and how difficult something might be. And that document will serve as a proof for what you stated in the beginning as terms and conditions, or what you wanted. And we can always refer to that. Now, if the client is becoming difficult or moving hard to deal with, we always just up there, because what you give us was theirs and we charge you for it. So if you are requesting for more, we just increase, because we work with time. So I just add my time to it and I'm split it, and then we work together. Yes, it has happened before, and then we've always got, for instance, let me give you an example. You go to the bar and then you order for beer. They give you a cup of beer or a glass of beer. You drink it. If you want more, you pay for the beer. Like, even if they decide to give you half price over it, you just still keep paying. So if you came to me with this glass of beer, I charge you for this glass of beer. Okay, you've paid for it. You've finished drinking your glass of beer, and you want more. There are, to some degree, I can allow it, maybe minor changes. But if you want drastic changes, we just renegotiate terms, and then we discuss the terms, and then we work together. So I understand this data collection and everything, and how difficult the client was. He asked you to do something. I believe that you have done that, and you have recommended certain things. I did research. I'm a material engineer, honestly, and I've done a lot of research. The truth of the matter is that sometimes what your hypotheses are not what you arrive at last. So you have what you wanted, you anticipated you would get, but
It's always, I want this and you might get that or you get some shops. So you have those set goals, but then the results always depends on the experiment. After you've actually run the experiment. And when you run the experiment, the results that you get will confirm whether your hypothesis was right or was wrong. And exactly what happened. So if I came back to tell you that, okay, this is what's on the ground, and you either take this or you go redivert your resources here, or then you said, okay, no, I still want you to do this. You give the person the results the person won't, because you collected the data. There's no bad data. There's only data, right? So we just give the person the data. Now, as whether the person can implement that data based on their hypothesis is their own decision. If it doesn't work, you provide an alternative, and that alternative costs you money. And then you just get paid for it. In my opinion.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but that's what I believe in.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, the methodology you stated is the same. But your approach seems very, very, I don't know, it seems very palatable for me. I wish I could learn a thing or two from you. Because I'll be honest, the business side of it is also another problem. Like he stated, you negotiated, right? And then you had to renegotiate. Man, our clients did not agree. They just didn't agree, and that really pissed me off. And what pissed me off about the whole thing was I wasn't the one, or my team wasn't, we weren't the ones who went directly to the negotiation table. That it was outsourced. It was outsourced, and it was really, really annoying. And it was like my hands were tied. I couldn't do anything about it. You see, and we kept on proposing ways and means alternatives to go about it. They kept adamant. No. Eventually, they came back to what we had proposed as wrong. And you agree, because at the end of the day, it's not any extra cash. That is because they didn't agree. That's what everyone wanted. Because you see, it was a social impact project. Yeah. And somehow in some corner of their mind, they thought they were doing us a favor, right? And that's what I mean. They actually didn't value what you are doing. Exactly. And that's why you need to price it. Like, I don't want to do business talk here, but then that's exactly what happened. Like, they knew the data you had. They studied the data, but they wanted to be reasonable. What they want. Right? Like, in the end, they came for your data for free. That's what they did. And that's business. Do you get where I'm coming from? You spent time on it. You did work, serious work on it, and you were right as a professional to recommend that to them. That right you don't have. Like that's why they brought the information to you. Listen, they gave you work to do because you're a professional in the field, and you recommended something to them, which you were right in the end. If I were you, I would double the price. I wish I was on that negotiation table.
Well, and what I'm hearing right now is that a lot of times the problems that we're trying to, like, that we're getting approached with to solve with data are so abstract that it's really hard to, like, put a tangible dollar value onto, like, how much time, how much resources it will actually cost to actually solve the problem. So then you end up going down 5 different paths, and then after that you need to stomach something that you initially thought. Okay, so the next thing I'd love to talk about is actually, I think it fits really well with this train of thought, is how do we actually measure the success of the data problem that we're working on? So, for instance, if we come up with 3 different alternatives, how do we actually measure, like, whether or not that alternative
let's say you get to know the progress you've made and what you have to do well and strategies you have to put in place to get what you want.
Okay, so if I get you correctly, you're saying that after comparing, you can say that you measure it incrementally. Is that what you're saying?
So it depends. So let's say you had, like example, if 20 were out and then you educated people in the community
work with seed companies. We want to know how are our products or our technology being deployed to the farmers. Do they have the right knowledge to develop? Because the work of seed companies, you give them the foundation seed, they multiply that, grind them, and sell. So we want to see, do these seed growers have the right technology? Are they right people to farm the right capacity? All this.
And do you guys effectively link all of the data sets you have together, or?
Yeah, actually that's my role at the moment. I'm supposed to lead the first office is supposed to lead all these up to the point of even the researchers who are doing the codings, the development, all that we integrating into one form so that the organization can at glance know how it's performing, how the products are performing in the market, how the farmers are doing, and also they can generate stories to influence policymakers in the country. They can generate the stories to inform the donors and the also the public at large. They just mentioned that some products or biotechnology products can be harmful to the society. We use platforms like Facebook, Twitter to give out this information, give out facts using this data so that we can show that the impact of these products.
So I think this actually leads us really well to our next piece. Can I get, what time is it? 4 o'clock? Okay, great. So it's like 30 more minutes and then we're going to open it up to do, like join the two groups together. So I want to move to the next section of this packet. And I think we've covered a lot of it. I think I'll just get started because it's taking a little bit longer than I thought. I think I want to move towards like thinking through the different people that are affected by our use of data and the ways that we should think about both protecting their privacy, making sure that, like, for instance, when you say that basically the person is at the center of a data set, I guess like the question I have for this group is when you approach the use of data, do you guys think about privacy? Do you think about the people who are impacted by the data sets that you're using? And then what are kind of the major concerns that you make sure to think about so that you're using data in a responsible way?
So I think recently this was something I did personally for an organization. They wanted to, get a database from my first office. So I was one of the few
you want to get. So I think very often, as he's talking about impact, we also have timelines and stuff to look at, but we have to kind of conscientize ourselves with all these needs in coming up with those variables, be able to get the right data so that we can have that impact. And the impact is not going to happen instantly. So, as businesses, as researchers, right from inception, these are things that we have to